Okay.
All right, you ready to go?
We're going to kick off with Dan Shelby. He's going to tell us about the incredible work that he does on river. So.
Thank you, Christina. Good morning, everybody. My name is Dan Shelby. I work for Confluence Research and Consulting. My first part-time project for Confluence was a hydro relicensing project on the McCloud River. I started working for Confluence full-time after receiving my master's degree in marine resource management. And the prospect of working on a historic project like the Klamath River dam removals was so exciting to me. When I found out Confluence was going to be involved, I decided to go back to school and get my PhD in water resources engineering with the dam removal and river restoration team at Oregon State. And so some of you may have heard that Bo and Doug are slowing down a little bit. And while it is true that they are going to be retired at some point in the near future, I just want to make sure that everybody knows that I'm planning to carry Confluence forward into this age of large-scale dam removal with fresh eyes and new credentials. And you'll have to forgive me for not being off my notes. I had my oral preliminary exam on Thursday, so I didn't have, and I passed, so PhD candidate Dan Shelby. Okay, so first I'm going to cover Confluence's involvement in the Klamath River, and then I'm going to spend some time talking about PhD thesis topics. We're going to cover a lot of ground, so it may seem like we're moving quickly at times. If you have a quick question or something quick that you want to contribute, feel free to raise your hand and I'll call on you. Otherwise, I'm going to also stop and ask for questions after each topic. So if you have something more involved or more of a general comment, if you could please hold it for the section break, that would be great. All right. So Confluence performed a flow and recreation study on the Klamath in 2001. That was part of the relicensing effort that eventually led to dam removal. We assessed boating, fishing, and general recreation conditions on the upper Klamath River and also on the lower section. So, oh boy. This is a big part of what we do here. We do at Confluence is we make these flow evaluation curves. So I know these might be hard to see for some people, but basically you have the flow along the bottom here, and this is the flow rating. And this line in the middle here is called the marginal line. So generally you have acceptable boating on the top side of the line and unacceptable boating on the lower side of the line. So here, this is an evaluation, flow evaluation for fishing here, and then this is a flow evaluation for general recreation here. So one of our principles is that all users require flows that cover the bottom of the channel, and that makes acceptable conditions for fishing, or any kind of acceptable conditions for fishing, boating, or general recreation. And so for general recreation can happen across a wide range of flows. Basically, you can have general recreation up to the point where the river becomes a torrent with no eddies. Otherwise, that's fine for wading and picnicking and swimming. Fishers generally prefer a lower range of flows here, so that it's easier for them to find fish and wade across the river and things like that. So here, this is a flow evaluation curve for Hell's Corner. And so we're crossing the marginal line for kayaks at about 600 CFS and for rafts at about 800 CFS. And so then this is for Boyle bypass. And kind of again, we're crossing the line kind of right in this area or just below 1,000 CFS. And so I want you all to pay attention to this steep part of the line because this is right in the area we're going to be for post-summer flows on the Klamath.
So is the flow scale the same on all of those?
Yeah, these ones are all the same. This one is a little bit different. And so yeah, the reason why the reason why this one is different and why there's more lines on these ones. So for these two runs, we did actual flow studies with a group of expert boaters, whereas this data was collected in the preliminary part of the study through interviews.
What's the scale range?
We have 5,000 CFS on the far right side and 0 CFS here. And so yeah, this is what the pattern of flow evaluation curves often looks like. It's steep across the low end of the curve, and then at some point you reach a peak, and then it tapers off as the flow gets so big that it's scary or hard to deal with. And this is for just most people. Like some people, so if you're a big water boater, you might be like, I love 4,000 CFS on boil, but averaging the data kind of takes that out. Okay, and so the 2001 study, it also recognized navigability challenges at sidecast slide and the need for addressing in-channel vegetation in Ward's Canyon, and as well as some facility improvements, especially to roads and access points. And so while I'm talking about this 2020 flow study, I'm going to pass around some visuals here. So this first one, this is sidecast slide, and this is a place where many large boulders were deposited into the channel by the construction of the road that's along Boyle Bypass. And so again, this is not a natural feature. These are rocks that were left here as a result of blasting. And the key navigation hazard, it's a little bit hard to see in this image, but there's a group of rocks right here. We're talking about maybe 3 or 4 large boulders that if we remove those ones, it would make a really big difference for navigability. We'll start these over here. And then the rest of the pictures are in Ward's Canyon. And some of them show you how cool and nice of a spot Ward's Canyon is, and then some of them show you the issues with navigability down there. All right, so the 2020 flow study. The reason why we did this study is because our 2001 flow study was, we did that study assuming that the dams were going to stay in. So we assessed a wide range of flows that the dams could possibly provide in the channel. But we didn't have a lot of detail in the range of post-removal summer flows. And since those flows are on the steep part of our curve, we wanted to get a little bit more data right around those post-removal summer flows so that we could inform recreation planning and outfitters about what those runs are going to be like. So our results showed that generally on the river, anticipated post-removal flows will provide acceptable boating conditions on most runs with a high-quality run on Ward's Canyon. Also, we found that incrementally higher flows had a significant impact on quality. So, for example, the difference between 800 CFS or 900 CFS or 1,000 CFS from Keno sometimes made the difference between being able to get a 16-foot raft down or having a really good time versus just being able to get down the river. We also assessed connections between segments and the possibility for overnight trips along the unencumbered river. And also we assessed what the best locations would be for access points. And once again, we recognized the need for channel restoration at Sidecast Slide and Ward's Canyon. So here are results from the 2020 flow study. And once again, you can see, so here, Does anybody have a marker by any chance?
I do,
You got one? Excellent.
not on, but.
Sorry about that. Well, I'll keep going for now. So again, we expect post-removal summer flows to be about 800 CFS from Kino. Although again, it's kind of an open question because the BOR hasn't let us know how they're going to operate the 2 remaining dams going forward. But this is our best guess because this is how the dams have been operated now. So for Kino run, Kino is a class 3 run. Thank you. And we evaluated Kino at 800 CFS, and kayaks found acceptable conditions on Kino. It does get a little bit low and a little bit bony in there at 800 CFS, but there's still some fun, punchy hydraulics, and so that was an acceptable run for smaller boats. So Big Bend, we ran Big Bend at 900 CFS. And again, that provided acceptable conditions for kayaks. But rafts, especially the commercial raft guides, felt like it was a little bit too bony to be taking big rafts down, especially big rafts that had passengers in them. Hell's Corner, we were planning to run Big Bend also at 800 CFS, but after running it at 900 CFS, we decided nobody needed to see it at a lower flow. Okay, so at Hell's Corner, we ran at 900 CFS and 800 CFS. And so you can see for Hell's Corner, it provided acceptable conditions for rafting and good conditions for kayaking. It's definitely not the same fun, big, punchy hydraulics that you get at the 1 turbine flow. But especially if you're in a smaller raft, if you're running an R2 or even a 14-foot raft, it can definitely be a good time. Or even some of the people who had 16-foot boats, they felt like if you got good at learning the lines, you might be able to get down it more easily. And definitely the kayakers still had a really good time on this flow, although it was more technical, more rock dodging, more hole dodging compared to just the big splashy hydraulics at the one.
What's the flow at 1 turbine?
It's 1700 CFS. Yeah, so that's what, I don't know if you were out on the river with us on Friday, but that was the flow that we saw on Friday. Yeah, so here, let me show you. So here on our 2001 study, 1700 CFS is right here. And so you can see that's providing very high quality conditions for rafts and kayaks. Although all those boaters all preferred a 2 turbine flow, which is in this range. And then for the most part, they felt like anything more than 2 turbines had diminished quality. All right, and Ward's Canyon, we were planning to run it at 900 CFS and 1000 CFS. And you can see that's providing very high quality conditions for both rafts and kayaks. Boaters found that they were able to get even 16-foot rafts down. There were big splashy hydraulics, lots of cool bedrock features, as you'll see when the pictures get around. And feel free to pass those around one at a time if you want to just look at one and then pass it to the person next to you. I don't know. However you guys want to do that's fine. But then but 900 CFS was so good, we decided instead of running 1000 CFS, we knew 1000 CFS was going to be better. So we decided to run 800 CFS to see if that still provided for navigability and high quality experiences. Which it did. 800 CFS was not quite as good as 900 CFS, but there were a few more places where the rafts got stuck or ran into rocks, but we were still able to get 16-foot rafts down. Still plenty plenty of big splashy hydraulics. So our conclusion from the 2020 flow study was that there will be no replacement for Hell's Corner on the post-dam Klamath. So we are truly losing a spectacular summer boating run with this dam removal. At the same time, we're getting a new opportunity on Ward's Canyon, which is very scenic, very fun, class 4 boating, but it is very short. Ward's Canyon is only 3 miles long. There is a chance that there might be, there will certainly be good whitewater up to the Copco 1 dam site. Whether that good whitewater extends up from the Copco 1 dam site into Copco Reservoir remains to be seen. There's probably about 30 feet of reservoir sediment on top of everything, and so we don't really know what the channel is going to be like under there. There's also a basalt constriction that is 1.5 miles below the end of Ward's Canyon. So immediately below Ward's Canyon, we expect to be class 2, although there's a strong chance that there will be one more class 3 or class 4 rapid created by the constriction in Iron Gate. Yes.
In the future, looking forward, as far as access to the Keno Reef, do you think that's going to improve? Because right now, public access and timing is not very good at all.
Right. So I'm not well versed on the latest round of access site planning. Tom would be a really good person to talk to about that. But yeah, but it kind of remains to be seen. So in general, with working with the access sites, it's been a struggle for the boating community. The current removal plans, they're prioritizing fire access points, and so far they've kind of been planning to just put the river access points wherever the easiest place to get a big fire truck into the water. That is something that Tom and a lot of other people are working on.
Yeah, just curious about the update.
Yeah. You're right. So you're right, and this is something that I feel pretty strongly about the post-dam Klamath. If the roads and the access points are not improved, the Klamath will never become a high-value recreation resource. Yes.
You said the Hell's Canyon run will disappear after the dams are removed, and is that just because there won't be water coming down from there's one lake above, right?
Right. So currently on Hell's Corner, there are daily hydro peaking flows. So during the summer, they drop the flow down to 300 CFS at night to store up water in J.C. Boyle Reservoir. And then during the day, when everybody goes to the office and turns their lights on in Portland, they turn on the turbine to supply power, and then they leave it on all day, and then at the end of the workday, they shut it off. And so that's why there has been a high flow all through the summer, is because of this daily hydro peaking regime. And so these flows that we're looking at, these are the same flows that come from Keno and Link Dam during the summer already. But at J.C. Boyle, they take that more consistent flow from Keno Dam, and they save it up during the night, and then they let it go during the day for power generation.
So then from the Keno Dam, you may have that 800 in the summer.
Right.
So the run doesn't really disappear. It's just not 1700. It's 800.
Exactly. And
is that more or less what we're looking at?
Yeah, that's basically it. But I mean, the point is that this 800 and 900 CFS flow is a much lower quality flow than this 1700 CFS flow. And so, and I think that a lot of private boaters will still utilize this flow next to it. Access. Here we go. Anybody else?
Toilets.
Hmm?
Toilets.
Toilets. Yep. So yeah, I have here, oh yeah, and that's down here too. Well-placed access sites with parking, bathrooms, and concrete boat ramps. What's that?
He wants a good one. Do we have a little stair thing that we go out and, no,
Okay. Anybody else?
put my boat in
Information,
town?
like accurate information on websites.
Ooh, yeah, that's a good idea. Information on websites. So what kind of information are you thinking?
Everything that's not on the other websites.
So just information about access, parking, camping, runs, flows, all that stuff. Great.
Any regulation,
Right.
fire regulation.
That's great.
I
Anybody
guess
else?
camping, if there's camping.
Camping. Yep. Got it. Oh. Okay, well I have new campgrounds down here. You're talking about camping information. But. Anybody else?
Like, drive-up put in or ramps?
Yep.
We don't carry
Yep.
them up?
Concrete boat ramps, and you know, there's a little bit of work to be done in figuring out which sites need to be the most developed. I have here fully developed access sites above and below Ward's Canyon with multi-rated ramps, rigging areas, and separate areas for kayakers and non-boaters. So again, I think Ward's Canyon is going to be a key resource for the Klamath. So if you want people to use that site, you need to build a nice access point. Because that matters for private boaters. If private boaters are going somewhere and then the ramp is always filled up with commercial rigs, or commercial rigs are going there and there's this, you know, this crappy gravel ramp that has potholes in it, that's going to affect how people use the river after the dams come out. Yes?
Playing a little bit devil's advocate, at least for the Oregon part, we're dealing with topography. And if you're standing in Spring Island, and yes, it'd be great to have a bigger parking lot, but where are you gonna go, you know?
Right.
And then, also, at one point they wanted to put in a, KRC was talking about putting in a paid parking lot, toilet, all this at Turtle Camp. Well, there's a, graveyard for the Native Americans there. So I mean, there's pretty much any place that's flat, you're dealing with archaeological sites. So I mean, it isn't just so simple that you're gonna go in and take people. So.
Yeah, I'm completely with you on that. All right, I'm going to take two more.
Post-dam removal, monitoring and study, so we continue to get information and public input on what their experience is, so then.
That's great, monitoring. And that is a kind of a problem with, you know, how do we know if our restoration efforts have worked? And we're going to talk about this on the next page, but how do you know if our restoration efforts have worked from a recreation perspective? And unfortunately, for a lot of these places, we don't really have great baseline data. So even if we start collecting really good quality use data after the dams come out, we won't necessarily know if we've done a good job. You know, there are the voluntary voter registration passes at Spring Island, but the question is, how many people know that those exist? How many people actually use them? The outfitters certainly, it seems like, are using them, but private voters, who knows? And there's nothing like that on any of the other segments. All right, so I'm gonna move on to my next page here. Oh, actually, okay. I'm gonna read the rest of the ones that we didn't talk about yet. So I have on here, further investigation of reservoir plain revegetation, remove dam-associated infrastructure, including penstocks, power lines, substations, concrete pads, and powerhouses. There's been some talk of leaving some of that stuff, and it could become dangerous if it's not maintained. It can attract graffiti, and it's an eyesore. Although I am in favor of retaining some infrastructure if it has high historic value and if it is accompanied with appropriate interpretation. So I think I have on here retain and repurpose Kafka 2 powerhouse, remove Link Dam or improve water quality improvements at Klamath Lake, remove hazardous in-channel veg in Ward's Canyon, and also channel restoration at dam sites and sites class slide that provides passage and quality boating opportunities appropriate for the segment. Yeah.
I think the local shirt that's mentioned all the way through, but to say land back is the water receiver was mentioned yesterday, the land back.
What was
Land
it?
back in the headwaters up top, as the water recedes, it was mentioned yesterday at zone C or something.
Yeah, so there is potentially a land bank, a seed bank underneath the reservoirs, and natural revegetation has worked out in a lot of places. Although I've also seen some information that possibly the soil in the reservoirs is going to be difficult to work with, and so that's the only reason why I have that out there, because if for example, the reservoir plains fill in with cheatgrass as soon as drawdown happens, that's going to be really expensive to resolve.
I saw in the photographs, a lot of those pictures had, you're boating through the trees, and that's because those are dewatered runs normally. And
That's exactly right. Yeah, so unlike Boyle Bypass, that regularly has big flows even under the hydropower regime, Wars Canyon almost never has any water in it. So those trees in the channel have been unnaturally allowed to grow there because there's only been 30 CFS in that channel for about 100 years.
So then the plan would be to remove those trees, cut them down, and buck them up, and let the water flush them down, or something like that?
That's right. So there's been a number of different methods proposed for getting the actual wood out of there. Chopping them up into rounds and letting the river carry them away is one option. There have been some concerns that the wood might not get out of there, and there might wind up being big piles of log rounds in some places. Another thing that's been talked about is helicopter longline operations. The thing that we can't do is we can't go down there with heavy machinery because there are sensitive cultural sites, not in the riparian zone and not in the channel in Wars Canyon, but on the upland banks there are lots of important cultural sites. So we can't get in there with any heavy machinery or drag logs out with cables or anything like that.
So from the photographs, it looked like the riparian that was growing there in the dewatered reach was alders. You cut an alder down and it just resprouts and grows back up.
Okay.
Is the hypothesis that it'll be unsuitable for the future alders after you cut them down because of the new hydrology?
So first I want to be very clear about something. This is not riparian vegetation. This is not the riparian zone that we're talking about. We're talking about trees in the actual channel. The riparian zone is along the edges of the stream, whereas these trees are literally growing up through the middle of the channel.
Yeah.
But then yes, you are correct. Once we chop those trees down, the alders that would come in and replace them, they won't be able to grow because they'll be completely flooded.
Yeah, that's the hypothesis. So, yeah.
They'll be under several feet of water, so they're not gonna sprout up.
Well, we'll see.
I mean, unless the river's dewatered.
In my experience, alders are pretty resilient, but if you really change the hydrology and inundate them a lot, that will eventually get rid of them.
Yeah, I mean, it's a dry riverbed that's going to be full of water all the time.
Yeah, and also for the record, we expect
It's a dry riverbed with alders growing.
And also, just if I can break in here, guys. So if we did leave these trees in the middle of the channel, we do think that they would die pretty soon. They would die probably within a few years. But the problem is we don't know how long they'll remain as a dead tree in that location, which obviously a dead tree, it doesn't really provide the same services as a living tree in terms of providing shading and things like that, but it is still a deadly hazard to boaters.
No question about it.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to talk about a couple of things that are my vision for the Klamath River, and then I'm going to move on to my thesis topics. So, access site locations prevent user-created trails. This is key for protecting cultural sites. Multi-use trail system facilitates day hikes and backpacking. Boaters and outfitters utilize new segments. Fishers appreciate healthy fish populations. Flows provide high-quality whitewater year-round. Flows scour veg and build beaches for recreation habitat. Segment and site names reflect indigenous culture instead of the people who built the dams. This is something that Tom has worked closely with the tribal communities about, and I personally believe in this really strongly. It would be a really big bummer if some of these site names that are named after people who built the dams and in some cases inundated and displaced lots of native people. It would be really too bad if this awesome place had names that were after those people. I would love to see indigenous people taking part in tourism development. Any remaining dam infrastructure is aesthetic, and interpretation stimulates deeper thought about dam removal and cultural issues. And also interpretation along the river and highways tell the story of the Klamath project and the people who lived there before the dams. I think this is really important too. As a historic dam removal project, it's really important that that anybody who's visiting this Klamath corridor, even if they're just driving through on a highway, that they have the opportunity to learn about the story of this project. Also, I would love to see the Klamath become the Grand Canyon of the West, with multi-day trips so popular that they necessitate a permit system to prevent resource impacts and alleviate camp competition. And I would love to see a new outfitting industry develop to supply and facilitate those trips.
When you say the Klamath is the river of the West, you're talking about the entire Klamath, not just the reaches that are affected by the dam, but
That's right.
there.
That's right. So after dam removal, the Klamath will become the longest wild and scenic river in the lower 48. There will be 286 miles of unencumbered river.
I'm sorry, we haven't designated those reaches yet. But it's on my list.
Get after it.
It's part of the vision, Ron, it's part of the vision, yeah?
Part of the vision, yeah.
Okay, so regardless of, I appreciate you adding that. Regardless of wild and scenic status, it'll be one of the longest unencumbered rivers in the lower 48. And so there will be a 286-mile trip possible from Keno Dam all the way to the ocean. And that's going to be a really spectacular resource. And I would love the recreation planning on this river to facilitate those trips so that people can appreciate this awesome place. Okay, so I'm going to go really quickly through my first two thesis projects because I didn't want to spend some time on my last one. So my first one, with normalized stream power as a predictor of whitewater quality. Stream power is a measure of potential energy loss resulting from water flowing downstream. It's really easy to calculate. It only depends on the slope of the river and the volumetric flow. And then if you divide that by the channel width, then you get potential energy loss per unit of channel width, which is a metric that's really relevant to boaters and could potentially allow you to compare boating opportunities against streams of different sizes. Thank you, Lee. So width normalized stream power is already used to calibrate artificial whitewater courses. So when a course designer is planning the channel dimensions, they use width normalized stream power to calibrate whether they want it to be a beginner, intermediate, or Olympic level course. And one study in my literature review found strong correlations between reach scale assessments of width normalized stream power and expert assessments and crowdsourced surveys and guidebooks. So my plan is to perform a rapid scale analysis of width normalized stream power to see if it holds up at the rapid scale. And having a metric like this, having something to measure on the river that would tell us about something about how hard the whitewater is, that would help us develop more consistent whitewater ratings across different regions and across different ranges of flow. And the way that I'm planning to collect this data is using a consumer grade drone. I'm going to use a DJI Phantom 4. And I'm going to use structure from motion photogrammetry to make a 3D model of the river channel and compare those measurements of the channel to flow to make with normalized stream power calculations. Thank you.
As a clip.
Oh.
Using a little technology
Okay.
to help you out.
Thanks.
Your helper.
Well, I'll do the clip next time. Okay. Oh, and so the original reason why I wanted to do this study was because I was trying to figure out a way to predict what the inundated reaches of the Klamath were going to be like. But I ultimately decided I couldn't do that because there's too much sediment in the way. There's no way for us to know what the channel is really going to be like. So American Whitewater has put together an analysis that's just based on slope. And I think that is a really good analysis, but I wasn't able to do something more deeply scientific, at least until all this sediment is out of the way. So I also have a project looking at non-construction costs of dam removal. So I'm going to rush through this one. These are existing cost models use only dam height and crest length, which means if you're just saying how much is going to cost to take this material out of here. But a lot of dam removals have a lot of other costs like pumping plants, restoration actions, bridges, improving wells, etc. And so my goal here is to look at those non-construction costs to explain some of the variability in the cost data. So here, all these dots here. These are a bunch of different dam removals, and this one's for dam height, this one's for dam length. And you can see there's variability all over the place here. And these models that they're using right now are these linear models. And so I'm hoping to use these non-construction costs to explain some of the variability in these models and come up with more accurate cost assessments for dam removals. Another problem with these models is, so you can't see, but this scale here, it only goes up to 35 feet. And again, so we don't have very many examples of large scale dam removals yet. So that's another problem with these models. And my main hypothesis here is that stakeholder involvement drives a lot of these non-construction costs. So I'm trying to figure out ways to predict stakeholder involvement in a dam removal.
Can I ask you a question on that real quick?
Sure.
Does stakeholder involvement make it go up because you're asking for more mitigation of different things? Is that, did I understand that right, or is
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah, generally, when stakeholders get involved with the project like dam removal, it's because they're going to lose some value as a result of the dam removal, and so it more or less costs money to alleviate that loss, and you might not be able to perfectly replace whatever it is they're losing, but you might be able to provide something else that they want. All right, so this is what I was hoping to spend most of my time on. It looks like I have a little more than 15 minutes left, but dam removal in the Wild West, risk management and title transfer in the Klamath project. So large-scale dam removals, like we've been saying, they're completely unprecedented. There's no established process or regulations around dam decommissioning. And so the goal of this project is to figure out what lessons can we learn from the Klamath that will make the next dam removal project go more smoothly. And what regulations or what actions can we take that will facilitate safe and efficient dam removals in the future. Okay, so I want to talk about the Elwha case study for a little bit. This is really the only other example of a large-scale dam removal we have. And I know there are a lot of things that were different about the LWA, but I'm just going to review it from a regulatory point of view, what happened, and then that'll help us kind of understand how we got to where we are in the Klamath. So these dams were unsafe and outdated. They only produce about 17 megawatts of power. And you can compare that to Grand Coulee Dam in the Columbia, which has over 7,000 megawatts, and another 300 megawatts of pumped power storage, or a single Columbia Gorge wind turbine produces 1.5 megawatts of power. So you could replace these dams with 10 wind turbines. Dams were also unsafe, so Glines Canyon Dam is a gravity structure, meaning that it was never fixed to the channel bed, and it actually blew out in the early 1900s, and the hole was plugged with fill. So there have been concerns that there will be another blowout for a long time, and there are tribal communities living downstream of the dam in the floodplain. These reservoirs were also filling with sediment really rapidly. There was no sediment analysis performed when these dams were built, and one of the dams is 30% full of sediment. So in this case, because of all the safety and environmental issues, the Fed attempted to mandate dam removal. They tried to tell the dam owner, you need to take this dam out. And the dam owner responded with a series of litigations, which eventually led the Fed to acquire the project for $30 million, which is about $50 million in 2020 dollars.
I think you said 30 million and you didn't mean that.
Okay, 29.5 million.
Yeah, okay.
But the Fed acquired the project through an act of Congress, but they didn't earmark any funds for actually removing the dams, and they didn't assign the dam removal to any particular agency. So there was this long period of the federal agencies kind of figuring out, like, what are we going to do here? And eventually the responsibility was left to the National Park Service to plan and execute the dam removal. And in the end, the project cost $354 million and took 2 decades. Okay, so now on to the Klamath project. So kind of some similar reasons for removal. There were the water wars in the early 2000s and conflicts between the tribes and irrigators, but also the power generation of the project is not really relevant anymore. So during these water wars, tribes have obviously been demanding dam removal for a really long time. These water wars led a lot of other stakeholders to start considering dam removal as an option. So Pacific Corp, or the dam owner, attempted to relicense the dams in 2004. The state and federal agencies made demands that would make the dams unprofitable. So when it was looking like removal might happen, FERC recommended voluntary owner participation in dam removal mostly because of their previous experience with the LWA. And they didn't want to have to wind up getting litigated again. So in 2010, the dam owner signs the KHSA under the contingency that they would not be on the license for dam removal. But after that, so the original KHSA had the dam license being transferred to DOI and having DOI be responsible for planning and execution. But Congress failed to enact the KHSA, so the license transfer to DOI fell through.
What's KH?
Klamath Hydroelectric Settlement Agreement.
Thank you.
Yes. So, nonprofit KRC was formed to hold liability and execute dam removal. The initial FERC application for removal grants 100% liability to KRC. In 2020, FERC denied that application and made a statement saying they would not accept any application that did not hold the dam owner as, did not leave some liability with the dam owner. But then the revised application entails a joint license transfer to KRC, Oregon, and California, with the dam owner still not being liable. But in 2022, FERC approved that license transfer with some stipulations that I'll talk about in a second. But again, the dam owner still holds no liability for the decommissioning process. Okay, so this is the funding structure of the dam removals. The original project scope is for $450 million, which includes a $446 million contractor guaranteed maximum price and a $4 million contingency fund. So that comes from $250 million in ratepayer surcharges, $16 million from California, and $184 million from Oregon, and $200 million from the California bond measure. So this was one of the stipulations of FERC accepting the latest license application. They demanded an additional $45 million contingency fund, which is equally shared between the two states and the dam owner. So the FERC did manage to get the dam owner in there for $15 million. Do you have a question over here? Okay.
We'll have millions of questions.
Come find me later. So I want to talk for a second about what actually made the dams unprofitable. Because there's a lot of talk about these infrastructure upgrades: fish ladders, fish screens, stream flow monitoring stations, temporary regulation, and water quality maintenance. And Pacific Corp could make these upgrades and still continue to profitably run the dams because they don't pay for those upgrades. So those kinds of infrastructure upgrades are paid for usually by bond measures, meaning that ultimately taxpayers would wind up paying for those infrastructure upgrades. And in fact, they may even make money on these infrastructure upgrades because they're not paying for them, but then they can write them off on their taxes. So, yeah, right. So they're, these infrastructure upgrades, FERC or Pacific Corp was just fine making these infrastructure upgrades and continuing to run the dams. The thing that made the dams not profitable was in-stream flow requirements demanded by the states under the Clean Water Act. Because the states demanded flows that would not allow Pacific Corp to profitably generate power under the cost of running the project. Okay, so you might also ask yourself, what does it mean for Pacific Corp to be liable for dam removal? So I have here some example contractor liabilities. And I was talking to Gwen last night, and it sounds like some of these things might be slightly different for the restoration activities. So here when I'm saying contractor liabilities, I'm talking about the construction contractors. So the construction contractor is liable for unexcused delays, any problems with availability of materials, failure to comply with plan, release of any known hazardous materials or the creation of any new hazardous materials, or any scope changes that the contractor requests. And so all these things are covered under the contractor's insurance program. So here are some examples of the licensee liabilities which are shared between KRC and the states. Any delays caused by unknown circumstances, like for example a giant flood or a really bad drought year. So, and any unknown hazardous materials. So if there are hazardous materials discovered during decommissioning that were not included in the original project scope, the licensee is liable for those. Any inaccuracy of information in the project scope, if any inaccurate information is provided to the contractor, KRRC is liable for that, or the licensee. Any additional restoration, okay, so this is actually not true. Where's Glenn?
Right here.
That's you guys.
That's that.
Yeah, that's Res. So Res is actually liable for additional restoration needs, which I just learned last night.
But they're the representative of the licensee.
Yeah.
So they're,
Well, you could say it's kind of interesting because you could say that the construction contractor is also a representative of the licensee. So it's really interesting to me that the liability is being handled in two different ways for the construction contractors and for the restoration contractors, especially since there are many more unknowns in the restoration work. You know, whereas the construction guys, the engineers, pretty much know what it's going to take, and they feel pretty confident that they know what they need to do to get the dams out. Whereas this additional restoration is a big question mark. Finally, failure to meet project goals resulting in litigation. Okay, so despite all the problems that are going on, there are really a few regulatory things that are working okay for this project. There, I put quotations here. Dam owner voluntary involvement. I feel like Pacific Corp is at the table more so in this case than the dam owner was in the LWAD. So going forward, any way that we can figure out how to bring the dam owners to the table and make them an ally, not an enemy, that will be helpful. Although sometimes we might have to force them to do that. Federal agency authority to add licensing conditions. So the courts affirmed various federal state agencies, including NOAA, National Marine Fisheries, DOI, and the Park Service. They all were able to successfully add relicensing conditions during the 2004 relicensing process. State authority to certify dam licenses under the Clean Water Act. So again, the authority of the states to demand in-stream flow requirements and other water quality requirements was upheld in this case. And again, I just want to say minimum flow requirements made the dams unprofitable. And getting the states involved was also potentially really helpful. So it seems like the states are more competent to come up with large amounts of funding, and they're more willing to accept liability in dam removal than the federal government. And that makes a lot of sense because the benefits of dam removal are highly localized. So the more that we can get people or agencies or whoever who live close to the dams involved with those projects, the better, because those are the people who will see the benefits. So overall, the lesson is that the Klamath case demonstrates a rapidly maturing regulatory environment around decommissioning. We also have some room for improvement. So this is a big problem here. Engineers building the dam did not plan for decommissioning. When they built this thing, they had no plan. They had no plan to take it down. And for example, you can compare that to nuclear plants. Nuclear plants are required to have a decommissioning plan before they even start building the project. It's unclear who is responsible for funding and executing dam removal. You know, when we decided we wanted to take these things out, there's no clear path of who should be responsible for doing this. The license transfer to a nonprofit in the States is completely unprecedented. It may work out really well, and it may not. It remains to be seen. Infrastructure upgrades. Infrastructure upgrades did not motivate the dam owner to remove the dams. And then also the owner only has a $15 million stake in the project. And States is completely unprecedented. It may work out really well, and it may not. It remains to be seen. Infrastructure upgrades. Infrastructure upgrades did not motivate the dam owner to remove the dams. And then also the owner only has a $15 million stake in the project. And I wonder if that will be enough to buy their full cooperation. You know, I think about, when I'm laying in bed at night, I think about, is there something they know that they're not telling us that's going to be really expensive? You know what I mean? Okay, so now I have another discussion question. I'm sure I'm over time right now. So maybe I'm just going to go through this, and if anybody else has a quick idea. So who should plan and execute dam removal? Should it be federal agencies? If it is the Fed, which agency? BOR, DOI, NPS, FERC? Some other agency? Should it be the states? Should it be a nonprofit? Should it be the tribes? Should it be a publicly traded entity? So I have this on here because in nuclear plant decommissioning, they're allowed to transfer their license to a publicly traded entity that specializes in decommissioning nuclear plants. So something like this, once we get a few of these under our belts, you know, if we set up our regulations right, then we could develop an industry around dam removal and have companies, publicly traded for-profit companies that specialize in dam removal. Or should it be the project owner, or should it be somebody else? Rats. Okay, so my next question is, you know, and this is a different question. Who should fund dam removal? Should it be the federal government? Should it be the states? Should it be private donors? Should it be project owners? Should it be ratepayers, tax bonds, something else? And this is kind of like a, you know, this is like kind of like a collaborative management situation, right? So if you have multiple agencies managing a river, what you want to do is you want to try to distribute the management tasks to whichever agency is handling that, is best at handling that kind of action. So for example, like, you know, like governments are pretty good at coming up with big sums of money, so maybe we get government to pay for dam removal. And then governments are maybe not necessarily good at planning and executing things, so maybe we should have... Oh, okay, I'll put NASA up there. NASA should plan and execute dam removal. Okay, so and then finally, I want to get everybody to think about what actions or regulations would facilitate safe and efficient dam removals going forward. Should we require dam owners to maintain a decommissioning plan? A lot of other energy decommissioning industries, they require the owner to maintain a decommissioning fund for the whole life of their project. And so that's all nuclear plants in the US. And a lot of oil and gas infrastructure, depending on the region, a lot of oil and gas infrastructure is required to maintain a decommissioning fund as well. Should we identify a responsible entity? Should we give the government the authority to mandate dam removal? Should we allow title transfer to a publicly traded entity or something else? So, thank you for attending my presentation, everybody. I'll take questions or comments. Yeah.
You go back to the funding page.
Yes.
You don't have to, but I mean, you talk about the numbers. 450 million, is that what I saw?
Yeah, so it's 450 million is what's in the original scope, and we now have another $45 million of contingency funds.
So 10%.
Yeah.
Okay. And so that may
So I haven't thought too much about the inflation issue, but I will say that, you know, if everything goes, my mind is that if everything goes really smoothly, we will probably still spend this $45 million. So, but if more than one thing goes wrong, or if there's more than one unanticipated thing that needs to be fixed after drawdown, there's probably going to be costs that are beyond what I have on this page. Yeah, and inflation would definitely exacerbate that.
Can I have one more?
I don't know, what do you guys think? Go for it.
Vote on it. No.
Let's have it.
Like California has like
This is
$100 billion.
upstream of this is the climate basin.
Yes.
Has there been, I don't know, my main is churning. Is there any relationship to what's gonna happen here relative to the significant issues of the climate basin and the water issues up there and the fight that's going on?
Sure. So,
That's not like they keep.
my impression is that people working on the 4 dam removals have mostly tried to separate that issue from what's going on in the upper basin. Because what's happening in the upper basin is such a contentious political issue that nobody really wants to touch it. Although I do think that the upper basin projects will have a really big impact on the lower river going forward. So for example, those of us who voted Hell's Corner on Friday, it's still really scummy and foamy and a little bit gross in there. And you know, that may change, that may get a little bit better, but it's still gonna be a kind of a scummy, gross, foamy river in the upper basin. Yes.
Tom is more deeply involved in this than I, but with regard to license surrenders and for the purposes of decommissioning and removing dams, there are discussions about making some changes to the Federal Power Act that would make this process, which is, you know, this is a one-of-a-kind thing at FERC, at least at this scale, and somehow or another make it look less drama.
Yes.
Let's put it that way. And whether or not we pull it off, it may take many years to change the Federal Power Act in a productive way. But at least that's happening. With regard to your observation that Pacific Corp would pay for the boarding emissions of section passage boarding and section 18 permits, at least in California, the way in which a public utility recovers its costs is based on capital expenditures mostly. So once they have to do a capital expenditure required by a government, then they can go to the PUC and get a rate increase in a general rate case. I assume that it's similar in Oregon. So I think you said that, these things, these physical improvements to infrastructure at public utilities is paid for by bonds. Maybe you didn't mean to say that, because at least it's been my experience that those kinds of things go into the general rate cases and are recovered, you know, in rates.
Okay, yeah. Thanks for clarifying that, I appreciate that.
And then, one last thing, I agree with you, your observation that the ability of the states to use their Clean Water Act authority under Section 401 of Clean Water Act was the major driver, I think, that put Pacific Corp into a spot, because really the only way to improve the water quality in the Klamath, other than the upper basin projects, but at least the water quality stuff that's associated with dams, you know, the blue green algae toxins and that stuff, is to make it a free-flowing river.
Yep.
And both Oregon and California water quality agencies were prepared to insist on that. But they were kneecapped, actually, at the end by the Hoopla tribe that filed a lawsuit against FERC for allowing essentially a tolling of the 1-year Clean Water Act requirement to get water quality certification out. And at the very end of the process, essentially, the DC Circuit waived the water quality certification requirements. So it'll be another, if that project was relicensed, it'll be another 30 or 50 years before the state could enforce water quality certification regulations. But the process, and so there was a lot of nail biting about, well, what would PacifiCorp do? Would they say, well, to hell with this, the leverage over us has just been killed by a very ill-advised lawsuit by the Hoopa tribe. And so we were nail biting, and in the end, PacifiCorp decided to go ahead. I think largely because they made commitments to everybody that they were going to support dam removal. But if that decision had been made earlier, the leverage that we have with PacifiCorp would have evaporated. PacifiCorp would have just said, let's go ahead and relicense the projects. We like the dams the way they are. So there's been a lot of nail biting, and of course, you know, your presentation was extensive, delightfully extensive, but you know, we could spend days.
Yeah, and I would love to get your contact information because I would love to have somebody like you read my thesis paper, make sure I get all the details right. Yeah, I was gonna say that too. One more question, Tom.
And then we're gonna take a break, so, yeah.
What's up, Tom?
I was just gonna say your observations on process, you know, right on, as Ron alluded to, we've made those very similar observations, and there's a very extensive memo that's not public, but I'll see if I can figure out, there's like a Richard Bruce Collins, his legal counsel for KRC, put together a 1,000-page memo on liability and addressing liability, and then it also has there's some good information on thinking about improving the process so it's not a choose your own adventure every time, and trying to come up with a better framework. And as Ron suggested, we are working on this with members of Congress too, so I've got information to share.
Great.
Maybe Richard would read this too.
Yes. Yeah.
All right, that's my time. Thanks, everybody.
Dan also for his ingenuity and taking PowerPoint and putting it on giant Post-it notes.
Shout out to my wife for making my flip chart for me.
Yeah.